My name is Nozi Pombandra, and I'm honored to be your program director as well as the moderator of this evening's panel. For those of you who have been here on time, thank you for your patience and thank you for making the time to be here. We are converged here this evening courtesy of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, the Wits School of Governance, the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation, the United Nations Development Program here in South Africa, as well as other players who have participated in making these series of debates a very important part of the dialogue that we're going to have as a country. Now, before I go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge a few people in the audience and just to say a very warm welcome to the minister when she gets here, and any deputy ministers in the room, leaders of the South African government, and indeed any other African governments that are represented here. We have leaders of civil society organizations that have made the trip out to Pretoria this evening. There are captains of industry from the private sector that have made a point of being here this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you for making the time to join us. Now, tonight we're really going to be interrogating the extent to which South Africa's National Development Plan speaks to the country's foreign policy as the country espouses for its regional, continental, as well as global presence. We essentially move from the premise that if the National Development Plan is to move from being a vision to indeed a reality of this country, that there are going to be moments like these where we have to interrogate, where we're going to have to critique and indeed have real, robust and oftentimes difficult conversations about the actual strategies that we're going to be employing when it comes to making this vision evolve into an actual reality. What we're going to do today, because of the changes that we've had in the program, is we're going to start off with a setting of the parameters of the debate, in essence. And the person who's going to be setting these parameters is the author of the paper that we're going to be discussing. Now, Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk is here. He is on the podium. He's written a paper, and this paper, you have a summarized version in hard copy that's been made available on your seats. I do believe that a soft copy is available for you through the Wits School of Governance if you want the full document and to really get a sense of the way he's argued in the paper and the findings that he's brought forward. Because today, essentially tonight, we're going to get a summarized version of that. The paper is entitled South Africa's National Development Plan and its Foreign Policy, Exploring the Interface. And what Professor van Nieuwkerk is going to do when he comes up is essentially give us a summary of his key findings and in essence put down the barriers that are going to inform the debate from there on. Once Professor van Nieuwkerk has spoken, we're then going to turn to the panelists that are on the podium. I'll give them about 3 minutes each just to formulate a response, to maybe even push against and maybe critique and challenge some of Professor's findings. And thereafter, we'll have a very quick panel interaction just to get the panelists again to push against ideas from each other, appreciating the fact that they come from different spheres and obviously hold different views and opinions on what's going to be presented this evening. And finally, I think the most important part of this evening, we're going to open up that conversation to the floor. We're going to have an open floor discussion where we're going to be inviting you to maybe stand up and voice your concerns or your questions and to challenge some of the premises that have been made here this evening with the panelists and indeed with the author. At any time in the program, of course, the minister will likely join us, and we'll make provision for the minister to slot into the program and give us her keynote address at that point. Usually at these events, we would ask the audience to please switch off their cell phones because there are cameras around. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and ask you to do exactly the opposite of that. Please keep on your cell phone, but please keep it on silent. Now, the reason why I want you to keep your cell phone on is that there are two conversations essentially happening here. There's a conversation in this room, and there's the conversation in the Twitter sphere now that we live in this world of social media. If you would like to tweet your questions or your opinions, the hashtag that we're using tonight is hashtag Tambo Debates. You can also follow me at Nozi Pombanjwa. I'll be able to extrapolate your comments, and we'll share them as part of the conversation and weave them into the conversation. So let me move swiftly along and just quickly give you a very brief introduction of Professor van Nieuwkerk. He's an assistant dean at the Faculty of Commerce, Law and Management at Wits. He has a master's in political science from the University of Johannesburg. He also has a PhD in international relations from Wits University. He is widely published in areas of foreign and security policy, and has advised numerous African governments in these particular spheres. Ladies and gentlemen, to give us a summarized version of the key findings of whether South Africa's National Development Plan speaks to its foreign policy objectives, please help me welcome Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies. I see many diplomats in the room, colleagues and friends. I'm happy to do this brief introduction. In the planning session, I was told to limit my comments to 10 minutes, and if the minister arrives, 8 minutes, but she's not arrived, I'm going to take 11 minutes. And I must say, you've probably seen my broken wrist. I was trying to summarize South Africa's foreign policy, but I couldn't. I broke my hand trying to do that. That's how difficult this paper was. And so let's see, when you compare two policy documents, both very substantial, the National Development Plan, all 450 pages, and in particular, Chapter 7, or as you know by now, the strengthened Chapter 7. If you compare the language and the template there with South Africa's foreign policy, and here we sit in the grand auditorium of DIRCO headquarters, where these policies are framed and implemented, then the question arises, to what extent is there an overlap? To what extent do these two policy instruments speak to each other? And that's what I attempted to do in my paper. The NDP opens with beautiful poetic language in the introduction. I'm sure you've seen that. I've got a few extracts of that in the paper, but I won't, just to set the atmosphere, but I won't read them now. I'll simply launch into my summary. So in order to anchor this debate, which is narrower than the question of where our foreign policy is going, I'm speaking as a South African, the narrower interpretation of the debate is to what extent our foreign policy enables commercial and economic diplomacy to take place, to advance or enhance the strategic objectives of the NDP, which you know is poverty alleviation, and we want to get rid of inequality by 2030. So to look at this relationship, I simply ask what the role is of foreign policy in our NDP. And South Africa's foreign policy is indeed conducted in the context of a domestic blueprint. The NDP aims to eliminate poverty and inequality by 2030. And according to the plan, South Africa can realize these goals by drawing on the energies of its people, growing an inclusive economy, building capabilities, enhancing the capacity of the state, and promoting leadership and partnerships throughout society. I won't give a summary of the NDP, that's not possible now, except to say that the plan is being implemented already in line with existing activities and programs of different government departments and agencies. So if you go to the DIRCO annual performance plan of this year, you will see an attempt to align its activities with aspects of the NDP. And according to the NDP, the plan, as I call it, its integration into these existing activities and programs is important because of the vital role that these structures play in transforming the vision of the plan into reality. That's the thinking behind implementing the plan. Let me now turn very quickly to the NDP's engagement with international factors affecting the country. There's a beautifully written part of the NDP that talks about global trends, and I can't go through all of them. I'll highlight what I think is important for this discussion. Only three. And of course, the plan says whatever happens outside our borders impacts on us very directly and very deeply. And the question is, how do we understand these trends, anticipate them, respond to them, build responses around them? It's a key question. The drafters of the NDP, and I don't know if there are any of the commissioners in the audience tonight, or those who wrote Chapter 7, the first significant trend it identifies as a changing global economy. It says simply, long-term shifts in global trade and investments are reshaping the world economy and international politics. It's the mantra that you've heard before of a shift of power and influence from north and west to east and south. It says South Africa has to respond to this trend by bolstering competitiveness and investment in high value-added industries and increasing the volume of mineral exports. Over the long term, or the longer term, it says South Africa has to do more to enhance competitiveness in areas of comparative advantage that can draw more people into work. So immediately in my mind, the question arises, what economic model is it that we are pursuing here? The second global trend is around Africa's development, and the plan simply says the economies of many African countries have grown more rapidly over the past decade, lifting large numbers of people out of absolute poverty. The question is, however, that several structural weaknesses are evident in this growth trajectory, and that must be overcome if Africa is to translate rapid growth and demand for commodities into rising employment and living standards. The plan identifies climate change as a global trend of significance. It says South Africa is not only a contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, it is also particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change on health, livelihoods, water and food, and South Africa has to adapt. The last trend that I want to highlight is technological change. It occupies a big section of the analysis in the plan. Science and technology continue to revolutionize the way goods and services are produced and traded. And it says, as a middle-income country, South Africa needs to use its knowledge and innovative products to compete. South Africa needs to sharpen its innovative edge. This requires greater investment in research and development. I want to zoom in now into Chapter 7, called Positioning South Africa in the World. Let me attempt a brief summary. This strengthened Chapter 7 of the NDP suggests that in order to pursue and implement an effective foreign policy which is linked to our domestic imperatives, South African decision makers must be guided by 8 decision points or 8 key points. The ANC used to have 7 foreign policy principles, and I don't know if these replace the principles or should be seen complementary. The 8 key points are the national interest, Africa as a priority, strengthened multilateralism, improved human security, mutually beneficial trade, integrated foreign policy making, and prioritization of new foreign policy themes. I've mentioned a couple of them, those global trends that need attention. This chapter also focuses, it doesn't run away from principles. It says that South Africa's evolving international engagement is based on Pan-Africanism and South-South solidarity, as well as the concept of Ubuntu. And you immediately want to ask, what does that mean now today? The document says, the chapter says, the philosophy of Ubuntu recognizes that it is in our national interest to promote and support the positive development of others. National security depends on the centrality of human security as a universal goal. And the chapter says that these concepts inform government's particular approach to diplomacy and shape its vision of a better world for all. Quote, better world for all. From this perspective, South Africa's national interest is not narrowly defined and includes the development and upliftment of its people, stability of the country and the constitutional order, growth and development of our economy, growth and development of the region, meaning Southern Africa, a stable and prosperous Africa, a just and equitable world order. The chapter launches into much detail around the Africa strategy, which I will skip, because I want to come to some of the problem areas in the chapter. Chapter 7 spends considerable time problematizing Africa's attempts at integration. So our assumption is for growth and development and peace and stability, we need to cooperate and deepen cooperation, leading to integration. The chapter says, the building blocks for strategically broadening and deepening African integration are absent. It's a powerful statement. And it recommends that government and policymakers revisit the logic of SADC, SACU, the FTA, and other regional arrangements to promote intra-African growth and trade. Indeed, the chapter spends a bit of time on what it calls international economic diplomacy. And it makes the point that South Africa's economic diplomacy, or diplomats, should adopt a holistic approach. And what it means by that is that it must address the economic and commercial needs of the country and cannot be compartmentalized into individual line function roles and responsibilities of departments and sectors, which I believe is very much the case today with our government. In fact, when it comes to the tools of the trade, diplomacy, it recommends that government should embark on a strategic assessment of the country's diplomatic footprint across the world. This paragraph in Chapter 7 has set DIRCO alight. It is calling for a task team to review the efficacy of our diplomats. We've got 125 embassies or offices or consulates. How do we judge their worth? How good are they performing? What is it that they should perform? The chapter and the NDP is not convinced that DIRCO is doing heavy lifting. This is not my view. It says, in fact, our missions and structured bilateral engagements, such as the one, was it last week with Germany, must be oriented towards seeking opportunities for sustainable job creation, responsible trade and investment, and partnerships for health, education, crime prevention, and rural development. When we turn to DIRCO's policy frameworks, I must quickly say that there are several. If you visit the DIRCO website, which is rich with information and data, you will find many of these. The challenge is, how do you put them together in a coherent whole that makes sense to the average listener or citizen of the country? And all I want to do here is quote DIRCO's vision and mission. DIRCO's vision goes like this. Our vision is an African continent which is prosperous, peaceful, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and united, and which contributes to a world that is just and equitable. Its mission statement comes closer to real business when it says, we are committed to promoting South Africa's national interests and values, the African Renaissance, and the creation of a better world for all. So I'm not going to go into further details on what DIRCO does, because I'm sure the Minister will speak to that particular point. Let me begin to finish off. I've got an assessment here. I'll touch briefly on it. My question initially was, to what extent South African government's foreign policy priorities support the implementation of the NDP. So what is the role of our foreign policy in realizing Vision 2030? I believe there's much positive in the plan regarding the role of foreign policy, or how South Africa ought to conduct its international relations in support of the overarching objectives of the plan. And indeed, the strengthened Chapter 7 of the plan similarly contains valuable pointers. Its biggest strength, in my view, lies in its articulation of a philosophical position and approach to world affairs that cuts beyond the chapter's original, rather narrow economic determinism. Africa and its people cannot merely be treated as a market and as consumers. South Africa's intervention in Lesotho under SADC auspices is not driven merely by a desire to secure its economic interests. It is also inspired by a commitment to peacemaking in order to bring about sustainable democratic solutions to the problems of governance. But the chapter and the plan itself contains a number of shortcomings that reduces its value as an implementing tool. The most serious obstacle is the finding in the chapter, or by the chapter, that South Africa is unclear in its expression of regional interest. Academics love this sentence because they all write about South Africa's hegemony. So every second journal has an article by some academic about South Africa's leadership role in the region, or lack thereof. The chapter suggests that there is no clarity regarding this and related issues, and it proposes a task team to conduct deeper research on a range of critical issues, which in the end, and I'm coming to my last paragraph now, can be summarized as follows. There are 7 questions that I ask of the chapter and of the plan and of the panel and of the minister. How do we understand our national interest? Do you know that there is a national interest policy document floating around government circles, which outsiders are not allowed to read? What does this mean? How do we understand our role in Southern Africa? And commentators point out that except for Mr. Mhlongo as the deputy ES, there are no other South Africans to be found in the structures of the SADC headquarters. Dr. Solomon might want to comment on this. What is South Africa's role in the rise of the South? What can it learn from developmental experiences of emerging economies? And in turn, what lessons does it have to offer? 4, is the South African diplomat geared to effectively and efficiently conduct economic diplomacy in support of the country's domestic priorities? 5, are we clear about the economic orientation and models that we want to pursue in addressing poverty and inequality, both domestically and regionally? 6, are foreign defense, trade, and related policies being harmonized to allow for an integrated international relations role and orientation, and in particular, a holistic Africa policy? Question mark. And lastly, what is the quality of engagement between policymakers and the non-state sector, academia, civil society, the media, others, private sector, in shaping, conducting, and assessing South Africa's international relations? These questions need to be addressed fairly rapidly, Minister, if the NDP is to be guided by an international relations vision that is at the same time implementable. On all of these so-called outstanding issues, there is a fairly robust literature informed by theory and practice and written by expert and analysts available for interrogation. There is no shortage of analysis or analysts. We know the score. The question is whether we engage. And much of this can be conducted and managed by the envisaged South African Council on International Relations, a wonderful idea awaiting serious implementation. In the meantime, this debate series will continue with ongoing engagements shaping these aspects of our national agenda. Thank you.